I think a lot of institutions in Europe and in general in the Western culture completely lost track when it comes to freedom, completely lost track what it means to be a free citizen. Freedom is not only about expressing your preferred gender or whatever, but also it's something much more fundamental that is rooted in a human being.
Trump and the MAGA movement in America, what's the response in Hungary and what impact does that have on Europe?
There are people who are legitimate refugees and we have a Christian duty to help them. But that doesn't mean that 440 million Europeans can help the rest of the world with unlimited resources.
So if someone says to you, Europe is doomed, do you say, yes, it is, or do you say, no, you have hope for Europe? Márton Veisz, thank you very much. It's great to see you here in Budapest, in your home city. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. It's my honor.
So I think we met maybe 2 years ago here at CPAC. Might have been more.
No, I think it was 2 years ago.
Yes. And I interviewed you for the documentary we made, Boers in Carpathia, about the Afrikaners and the Hungarians. And we've seen each other a few times since then. Last year, I believe November, we saw each other at a conference in Bratislava. That's it.
Yes, we did.
It's and we had some beers the night afterwards, and I remember we had a very interesting conversation about culture and the state of Western civilization. And something you said to me that I actually thought about quite a bit is about the foundation that you work for. The in English it's the Foundation for a Civic Hungary.
Yes, exactly.
And you had an interesting explanation of the word civic, which really resonated with me. So maybe we can start with that. Why is the word civic, and what's the appropriate way to understand that from your perspective?
Well, it's a word which is really hard to translate to English. But it has a very special meaning in Hungarian and actually in German. So for your Afrikaner speakers, maybe the bürgerlich is more appropriate, more easily to understand, because it carries a very specific value system. Which basically describes a very specific social role and social identity for the individual, because it describes a person who already from the Middle Ages was not a lord, but not a simple subject either, but a person, a citizen, which is very proud of its liberty, but understand that the liberty of one's liberty carries a lot of responsibility as well. And I think that's the core of the word. I think that's the core meaning of this value system as well. And of course, during the last several hundred years, it had a very interesting way of expanding and of an evolution. For our political community, around the Prime Minister Viktor Orban, around Fidesz, our party, and of course our foundation, I think that describes the core value, describing who we are. And it's really important because after the collapse of communism, from the World War II up until 1989, 1990, this was basically a forbidden word, a forbidden value system.
Yes.
Something that was really much oppressed, culturally speaking. And it had to be recreated to understand that as a citizen, as a Hungarian, you deserve liberty, which the communists taken away from you, which the fascists taken away from you during World War II. Mm-hmm. But you have to understand that in order to have liberty, you have to have some responsibilities as well. So it reflects greatly on the quote from Ronald Reagan, for example, that liberty is always one generation away from extinction.
Yes. Yeah, and what I like about that is you mentioned this the new idea of freedom is just you do whatever you want to do, and so Cicero, the great Roman Republican, wrote one of his books is the Offices. It's on responsibilities, and the idea of freedom was very much linked to fulfilling your responsibilities within the context of the community. And our understanding of freedom today is almost the opposite. It's when you say to someone you have responsibilities, they say, "Oh no, don't oppress my freedom and don't take my freedom away." And so I think the classical view of freedom has always been that freedom is rooted in truth. You can't make up your own truth or your own facts, and it's rooted in goodness and pursuing what is good, and it's rooted in beauty. But the modern idea is just detached from all of these things.
Yeah.
And I think this is what's great also about CPAC and CPAC Hungary, and the role, not just CPAC, but the role that Hungary is playing in the European context. And do you see it that way, that the Hungarians are trying to sort of revive or rehabilitate the idea of freedom and what it means to be free?
On one hand, yes, because I think a lot of institutions in Europe and in general in the Western culture completely lost track when it comes to freedom, completely lost track what it means to be a free citizen. But on the other hand, I'm much more optimistic because these are the institutions. But if you talk to everyday people, whether in Germany, Austria, the US, South Africa, you see that people have this kind of understand that how they want to be free is not just because of some ideologies that it's freedom is not only about expressing your preferred gender or whatever, but also it's something much more fundamental that is rooted in a human being. And we can quote, like, I really love that you quoted Cicero. I just listened to your podcast this morning when I went to CPAC about Rome, and they said that this collective identity for Romans was very much a strength, and of course we can criticize a lot about Roman history and slavery and all that, but still that Rome was a successful empire and a successful republic when they had this kind of belonging, like the whole class of citizens, that they have some common identity, that they don't really fight with one another, like we can see with many Greek states. Then there are some infightings, but they always had this common identity of being Roman is something that collects the plebeian with the patrician as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So our viewers, we have viewers in different countries all over the world, but especially in South Africa. So maybe we should use this opportunity for you to explain Hungary in a certain sense. And what I mean by that is news, as you know, is often filtered. And sometimes when you read about Hungary, you read that Hungary has a prime minister who's a dictator and, all these. I know the Ukraine war becomes very complicated, but we can decide if we want to go there. But what's interesting to me, the reason I asked this is I had a conversation with some of my friends recently. I don't know what it's like to have a prime minister or a state president of whom you are proud. You think this person represents me. I've never experienced that as an Afrikaner. And then when you read about Hungary in the news, you get the impression that Viktor Orban is a very hated man and people in Hungary despise him. But when you come to Hungary, you see he's extremely popular. That's what I see when I walk around. And so can you explain that from a Hungarian perspective, just making sense of what's happening in Hungary, what's happening with the politics in Hungary?
Yeah.
And maybe if I should add, why is Fidesz doing so well? Because it is doing well in elections, but why is it so popular?
I mean, you had this experience with me that I'm a history buff. So I always say that we have go back in history a little bit. And I try not to go back until Adam and Eve. But when we are talking about this kind of success of Fidesz and the personality of Viktor Orban, you have to go back at least to the communist times. That fortunately African people never had to experience this. American people never had to experience this. But what is a dictatorship truly like? I'm fortunate enough that I was born in 1990, so the year of the first free elections in Hungary. But yet we do have to understand that my parents' generation and then older generations had to live in a total dictatorship, where it wasn't simply allowed to go to church, for example. Like, it's a good example that because of so I'm coming from a Christian Catholic family, but because my father worked in a state office in my hometown, my parents had like a secret marriage in church. Like, they couldn't invite like big family and have a big event in their wedding. Of course, they had that in the formal state ceremony, which is like, what are those like? But it wasn't allowed for him as a civic official or public official to have like this big wedding ceremony in a church. And there are countless examples, like the censorship that actually existed. Like, you couldn't publish, you weren't allowed to publish your books or your articles if you weren't for the preferred class, and so on and so on. And in this framework, Hungarians first rose up against communism in 1956, which is a very proud moment in our history, that from the Soviet and communist occupation, that Hungarians, a small country, took their destiny into our own hands. And although that revolution unfortunately failed because of hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers.
There was a clampdown by the Soviet Union.
Yes. But still, this kind of spirit of freedom fighters are there in Hungarians. And the concept of freedom is again, in Hungary, is very much rooted in a concept of freedom which includes the society. It doesn't necessarily have to be like individual freedom, because when we are in the West, they often only see individual freedom when we say the word of freedom. But collective freedom, the freedom of the society is also, or the nation is also very important. And in these decades during communism, still this kind of freedom fighter spirit existed. And in the late 1880s, there was a small student association formed, the very first one, which did not have a party approval from the Communist Party. And as I just mentioned to you before our recording, in this street where we are sitting now, a student association was formed, which was called Fidesz.
I know Fidesz it's actually three words combined. It's
Fiatal Demokraták Szövetsége, so the Alliance of Young Democrats.
That's it.
And they originally meant to be an alternative to the official communist youth organization called KISS.
So was it an illegal organization?
No. So they were clever enough, and they were law students, so they understood the law.
Okay.
How can they turn the law of the system against the system?
Okay. Yeah.
And they found a loophole. So it wasn't illegal, but it certainly was not tolerated.
Yes.
So reprisals happened. So the communist system, like Viktor Orban, for example, was arrested because participating in protests. But still, it was a movement that nobody could hold up. The opposition, the democratic opposition, already started to show some signs of life from 87 and 88. And, again, retrospectively, it's easy to see it's only a couple of years away, couple of months away from the collapse of communism and the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
But back then, nobody knew that.
You didn't know it was coming, yeah.
Everybody is saying who lived in those times, and I'm spoken to, that in 88, nobody thought that it's going to end so suddenly.
No one thought that the apartheid system would end as well.
Exactly. So these kind of historical events, often those who live through them, they don't even recognize the signs.
Yes.
And later on, of course, it's much easier to see the pattern. And a lot of things happened from 88 up until 1990. One of the most important event of this process of this democratic transition was the burial, the reburial of the Prime Minister of Hungary, who was the Prime Minister of Hungary in 1956, Imre Nagy. So he was executed for his role in the revolution against the Soviets. Yes. And he was reburied in 1989. And so it was a huge event with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people attending and watching on television, probably millions watching in television. And it became a huge political event. And a lot of politicians spoke there. But there was one young person, a 20-something-year-old, who nobody really thought it's going to be like the main speaker. But everybody remembers one thing that this 20-something-year-old said.
Even I know about that speech. We know about that in South Africa.
Yeah, and this 20-something-year-old, like maybe many people didn't even know who he was. He was the very first person who said, the Russians have to go home.
Yep.
And that was not allowed to say. That was not allowed to question that the Russian presence, the Russian military presence in Hungary. And he was the very first one who said so. And that person was Viktor Orban. And it was an absolutely crucial moment in this process of the democratic transition that the system recognized that they cannot take him away. They cannot put him in prison. They cannot make some show trial against him. They saw that the end is near.
It's like that Star Wars quote where I think is it Obi-Wan Kenobi who says, if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can imagine.
Exactly.
Viktor Orban became like that in a certain sense.
In that moment, I think he did. I think he did.
So I often say that for Hungarians or Europeans to understand the Afrikaners in South Africa, one should think of the Afrikaners with regard to the South African government, almost like the Hungarians with regard to the European Union, because South Africa is very big. It's even more diverse than Europe with all these different nations and ethnicities and languages. But maybe you can explain a bit about the Hungarian position with regard to the European Union, because you are sort of the stepchild of Europe in a certain sense. And one example, and I know you and I spoke about this earlier, is the immigration crisis and how Hungary, the whole of Europe or much of Europe went this way and Hungary went that way. And Hungary was very much scolded for taking a strong stance on immigration control. And eventually the rest of Europe caught up with Hungary. Is that an appropriate way to describe it?
Yes and no. I think that the everyday Europeans, I mean, even if you asked them 10 years ago, they were not in favor of mass migration. But nobody asked them ever. I mean, look at what's going on with Brexit. I think that's a great example. Like Brexit, if we accept that it was about immigration, and a lot of polls show that it was about immigration and taking back control of immigration. So people voted to Brexit for the reason they did not want this mass immigration into their country. Yet what happened after Brexit, even more wide open gates for mass immigration into Britain. And there's a problem with the whole of Europe. I mean, if you poll people, if you ask them this question, do you want uncontrolled mass migration into Europe? Because that's what's happening, 1 million people at least a year. Then they will say, Of course they don't want to.
Exactly.
Because they understand the consequences. They understand the social welfare system cannot work if we have a lot of people who are not contributing into the system. That they understand the risk coming with crime. Of course, there are people who are legitimate refugees, and we have a Christian duty to help them. But that doesn't mean that 440 million Europeans can help the rest of the world with unlimited resources, because we don't have, unfortunately, unlimited resources. And nobody really asked this question of the European people. But the European elites decided that because of the labor market, because of aging society, and did not even consider any other options for the problems Europe have, they said, okay, let's have wide open gates. Let's have basically uncontrolled migration. And they basically ignored every warning sign on the road. When people voted and they had something to say about migration, they always refused it. And the elites basically always ignored this refusal.
Yeah. So there's this disconnect between the people and the elites.
Yeah.
And the elites are not just politicians. It's also people in the media,
absolutely,
academia, commentators, and so forth.
I think there's even more so, because the people in media, they
and entertainment.
And entertainment and all that, they have even less responsibility to answer any questions to the everyday people. Yeah. I mean, the politicians, at least every 4 years, they have to take part in a democratic competition when it's allowed, although we can see it in France that Madame Le Pen is not even allowed to run an election, so they just put away the strongest candidate who can challenge the establishment. But again, people in the media or NGOs, entertainment, academia, and so on, they don't even have this kind of responsibility. They don't even have to answer these questions to their voters. So yes, when we talk about the elite, and it's not just the political elite, but all those you mentioned, there is a huge disconnect between them and everyday people.
But then the question is, it does seem that Hungary, and not only Hungary, but largely Hungary is somewhat different than the rest of Europe.
Yeah.
And so the question then is, why is that?
Well, in your previous question was asked, why is Fidesz successful? And now you're asking that why is Hungary doing differently in immigration? Well, there is one answer there, that Fidesz listens to what people care about and offers solutions, offers answers to those problems. And that makes us successful politically. And although it means we have to face a lot of criticism and a lot of legal and political battles on the European level, it still means that we do what best for Hungary and what best for the Hungarian people.
And probably there's also that you mentioned, the dynamic of having been on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain and living with that history of communism in Hungary and knowing what it really is like. And it's very sad to see how much of Western Europe is, flirting with very dangerous policies. But it seems that there's a sort of a reaction. The pendulum seems to be swinging back. And so on that point, what has the response been? Not that you can speak for all of Europe, but broadly speaking, the response been to Trump and the MAGA movement in America. What's the response in Hungary, and what impact does that have on Europe?
In Hungary, we are thrilled. It's easy to say that we are thrilled because there is a man back in the White House that truly understands this is what we have been talking about, that how can be responsive to the problems of the everyday people and not just giving very technocratic answers which do not reflect what people want and what people democratically expressed. But Western Europe is a very different place. That's for sure. I mean, it's a good example that basically, ever since Trump was sworn in January, they're just scratching their heads what's happening with their US partners, because they had 2 months, 3 months, and even the campaign trail the previous 4 years to prepare what the next Trump administration would do. And yet they're still here and not understand that there is a fundamental change in American politics, that Americans are fed up with these ideologies, which were promoted by the elites we mentioned, when it comes to immigration and a number of other issues, wokeism and all that. And these people, these ideologies of uncontrolled migration, wokeism, they've been kicked out of Washington. And now they are knocking on the door, not knocking on the door, they're inside the gates in Brussels.
Yep.
And then Brussels people live in their own bubble. They simply don't understand what's going on around them.
Yeah. So if someone says to you, Europe is doomed, do you say, yes, it is, or do you say, no, you have hope for Europe?
No, I absolutely have hope for Europe. I mean, I think this is a great civilization, a great place, which is rooted in the Judeo-Christian values, in the Roman legal system, in Greek philosophy. There are in the Enlightenment even. So there are so many great things Europeans have achieved in our history, and I think there is hope. There is always hope. And we're working and Fidesz and our political community in Europe, the people attending CPAC, are working towards this goal, that we can save Europe. I think they often say in Western Europe, the establishment, that we are against European values because of this and that. But no, I think we are the ones who are for the traditional values of Europe.
Exactly, yeah. Well, Márton, thank you very much. It's great speaking with you. And I'm sure we'll see each other again at CPAC. And thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Great.
If you support this initiative and you want to contribute to the work that we are doing, I want to encourage you to click on the link in the description and to sign up as a contributor.